All right, thank you everyone for being here on this rainy evening. My name is Catherine Villarreal, and I'm Vice President of Public Affairs at Coalition for the Homeless of Houston and Harris County, or CFTH. This is my low-budget teleprompter. I'd like to thank all of you for being here. Our region's amazing homeless response system is called The Way Home, and it's made up of dozens of partners, public and private, service providers and local governments, secular and faith-based, several of whom are represented here tonight, allowing us to solve homelessness for individuals and families in a holistic manner. And our organization, which is a nonprofit, CFTH, coordinates the work of The Way Home. One of our goals is to educate our community about homelessness in hopes of challenging current perceptions, changing hearts and minds, and ultimately advancing our system's work. And that's why we launched this series last summer, CFTH Presents. We really like to think of ourselves as the local nerds on homelessness, the folks working with partners to produce innovative solutions driven not by our hearts or our feelings, but by what the data suggests will be most effective. So in that vein, the speaker series is like a thought spot for interesting local research and initiatives. So tonight we're going to be spotlighting advocacy. With the Texas State Legislature in session right now in Austin, we thought it would be timely to talk about decisions shaping our city and county, how they're made. We'll hear about the legislative process and how advocacy drives change, and we hope you'll walk away having learned more about how to effectively engage with local government and support initiatives aimed at solving homelessness. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to thank all the folks that have made this evening possible. I want to thank COURT for sponsoring this year's series. COURT supports more than 320 supportive housing organizations, helping to solve homelessness in almost 40 cities across the country. Thank you to Ecclesia for hosting us and providing the tasty food, St. Arnold's for donating drinks for the event, and of course our speakers for taking the time tonight to share their expertise. And with that, I am pleased to introduce our speakers, and feel free to join me on the stage as I call your name. First, our moderator is Hannah Cobb, Public Policy Manager at the Greater Houston Partnership. Hannah is a member of the Greater Houston Partnership's Public Policy team, where she leads local issues with a focus on ensuring advocacy efforts drive meaningful impact at the local level. Before joining the partnership, Hannah served as the public affairs lead for Houston City Councilmember Sally Alcorn, where she gained experience in municipal governance and public engagement. A graduate of UT at Austin with a degree in government, Hannah is committed to public service. And she is also a board member and former membership chair of Covenant House, supporting initiatives that provide resources and hope to at-risk youth experiencing homelessness. Welcome, Hannah. Please join me in welcoming Council Member Julian Ramirez, at-large position 1 for the City of Houston. Councilmember Ramirez was elected to office in December 2023 after a 34-year legal career. As an at-large council member, he serves the entire city. He serves as chair of the Quality of Life Committee, which I'm sure we'll be talking about, the vice chair of the Public Service Delivery Committee. Councilmember Ramirez has extensive experience on criminal justice and public safety matters, having served as an assistant district attorney for Harris County from 1989 to 2016. He also served as chief over the Public Corruption Division and later the Civil Rights Division. Councilmember Ramirez holds a Bachelor of Arts degree and a JD from the University of Texas at Austin. Oh, so that's something y'all have in common. Making connections already. And finally, I'd like to welcome my colleague, Jamie Carruthers, our Director of Public Affairs. He's been with our organization since July 2024. In his role, he is responsible for working with state and federal policymakers to help ensure the right policies and resources are in place so that everyone in our community has a safe place to call home. He is passionate about advocating for innovative, effective, and compassionate laws that will establish Texas as the national leader when it comes to ending homelessness. Previously, Jamie was Executive Director for Texas and VP of Policy at Street Grace. He's originally from Baytown and holds a JD from the University of Houston Law Center. Thank you all for being here.
We're going to be sharing. on? It is? Hi, how's everyone doing?
Great.
Good? Well, Councilmember Ramirez, Jamie, it's great seeing you again, and I'm really looking forward to tonight's discussion. Obviously, I'm the moderator, but I'll be answering a few of the questions. We'll keep it super conversational, and then at the end, we'll open it up to Q&A for everybody. So let's get started. So tonight's discussion is all about advocacy, and we thought we would kick off the conversation with a bit of an icebreaker, which is, what does advocacy mean to each of us? And I thought I would start with a little bit of a brief story and answer the icebreaker, and provide a little background as to how I got involved with the coalition and became familiar with the issue of homelessness. So a little over a year ago, the Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce reached out to the partnership because the issue of homelessness was rising in their city. And they heard about Houston's success somehow, all the way from Michigan, and wanted to come down and learn from us. And I didn't know anything about the issue of homelessness. And I quickly called my friends at the City of Houston and the coalition, and true to Houston's spirit, everyone jumped on board right away. Next thing I knew, I had a full itinerary full of meetings and tours, and so I luckily got to go on that tour and learn more about our homeless system. But one thing was abundantly clear, Houston is no gatekeeper. We shared our wins, our losses, all the lessons that we'd learned along the way. But that experience also gave me a deeper understanding of the issues that our city still faces. And since then, with the leadership of our new president and CEO, Steve Kane, we've gotten more involved on the issue of homelessness and anticipate some advocacy there. But I actually got a call from the Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce last week, and because of their trip to Houston and what they learned, there are 115 individuals either housed or waiting on housing, which I think just really drives home the point, right? Advocacy doesn't just affect our community, it has ripple effects beyond our city. And so that's kind of what advocacy means to me. But I would love to hear from both of you. Councilmember Ramirez, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, you know, I thought about this, and I think advocacy for me just means learning more about an issue and trying to enact good policy, right? And homelessness is certainly something that I've learned more about as I've been in office. It's interesting, when I was campaigning back in 2023, I complained about a lot of things, but not homelessness, you know, and I would tell people at meetings that homelessness is actually an area where the city has done a good job, you know, of reducing the numbers. We've had success there, so we just need to continue that. And sadly, of course, you know, in the last year, we've seen the numbers climb due to a number of factors, and it's an issue nationwide. And so we need to take up that mantle of advocacy on homelessness and seek out additional funding and additional tools to start making gains again, you know, and putting people in permanent housing, getting off the streets.
Yeah, so we can continue to be a leader in that space. You're absolutely right. Jamie, what about you?
So for me, I think my definition or my sense of what advocacy is changed a little bit over the years. When I was back in law school, I took every single policy and legislative interpretation class they had, never thinking I would have a career in it, just because I was a huge nerd and I loved it. Also, it was the one class, the classes I was best at, right? So that was also very important to me. And I worked for a political action committee right out of law school, but never really thought I could do this, and became a real lawyer for a number of years, and then stepped back into advocacy. And advocacy is, in a nutshell, the biggest lever we have. It's not everything, and it's not the end of everything, and certainly we can pass any law we want. We still have to implement that law. But it is still the biggest lever that we have. And when I say we, I mean we. I am always an evangelist as far as reach out to your legislators, take advantage of this, they work for you. Have a say in this, because the biggest issues we face not only homelessness, but in our day-to-day lives, are going to be decided for us at some level by the laws that are passed. And so it's extremely important. But advocacy to me is it's opportunity. It's opportunity for change. It's opportunity for change at the very highest levels, but it's also very incremental. It's got to be incremental, which can be very frustrating in Texas where we only have a session every 2 years. But still, it has to be incremental. It has to be strategic. To me, advocacy is always data informed. Advocacy is always personalized to that person or that office that I'm talking to. How can I bring it home and make it relevant to them? And advocacy is about looking down those next steps and being prepared for that. Yeah.
Well said. Well, speaking of advocacy, the three of us, I believe, are heading up to Austin tomorrow for the Greater Houston Partnership's legislative reception. I think you have some meetings yourselves, but to really kick off the 89th session. And so I was really curious to hear, Jamie, what bills are you looking at? What priority issues are you looking forward to watching?
So there's a lot, and a lot that we don't know. I'm assuming this is a safe space, and I'm not going to say anything ugly or untoward about anyone,
You're
but
safe.
I am going to talk about some political realities of what we're looking at. And I would say the landscape of the session has really been changing. It's very fluid, largely because of federal uncertainty that is drifting down to our legislature, which is very different. I remember going into offices when I was working on human trafficking and child sexual exploitation and saying, look, John Cornyn and Ted Cruz did this in the Senate, and we should follow what they're doing. And they were like, we don't care what those guys do. And I'm in Republican offices. They're like, we don't care. This is the Texas Capitol. Get out of here with that, buddy. Well, now they really do care. The R's really do care what's happening upstairs at the Fed. And it is changing the dynamic in Austin. And that's a big, long preamble for me to get to the bills that you asked me about. But that's because the major legislation we are anticipating is not dropped yet. We've seen the drafting document that got sent to Ledge Council. Ledge Council is a building full of lawyers in Austin that take legislators' policy ideas and turn them into actual fileable bills. That is going to come out of Senator Tan Parker's office. Senator Parker is out of Flower Mound. We've been working assiduously with his office, along with a lot of other groups, to try to design this legislation that we know is going to encompass mental health, it's going to encompass stacked services, and it's hopefully going to have a funding component to it as well. So we've been most of our effort has been in that. There are some bills, however, that we've been very mindful of. Unfortunately, few of them are positive, but one of them is Senate Bill 241 by Representative Flores. Representative Flores has a bill that expands in a very negative way. We think the impact is going to be very negative. The statewide prohibition on camping. Senator Flores' bill would actually require municipalities to have a hotline that citizens can call. The city then has, I think, 90 days to report an encampment. The city then has 90 days to shut that encampment down. If they don't, the state will come in, or can come in, close it for them, and then charge the city whatever it costs. For people who practice in this area, we realize how incredibly insane this is. But to give all due respect to Senator Flores, it can also be, I think, very, very frustrating for those on the outside looking in, or those on the outside just seeing the problem and not understanding the system. So that's really our job, is to go explain and to talk about why this won't work and the problems it's going to cause. But I know we had talked about Wally's bill, 636, which is a data sharing bill. I don't mean to steal your thunder, but we actually have been working on this bill a little bit, which would, THN, the Texas Homeless Network, they're collecting data from all the continuums of care around Texas who voluntarily report. And they have a statewide database that would be extremely useful for everyone, from local government all the way up to state, to have this kind of information. And Representative Wally is going to create a database that formalizes this arrangement, also adds in insurers and HMOs so they can start doing identifying people who are at risk of homelessness, who have health issues now, and start taking steps to make sure they don't fall into homelessness in the future. So it's a very, very positive bill we're looking at. And since I gave Senator Flores a bad time, I'm going to say a positive bill that he did, which Representative Gilliam also is sponsoring in the Hasty. Senator Flores is doing the Senate companion to Representative Gilliam's bill, which is a really good bill. And this is an example of how, smaller granular things can make a larger impact. And that bill says that, hey, HUD manufactured homes, which are mobile homes, You can't zone them out of existing cities. Obviously, that's not a problem in Houston where we have no zoning, but for other cities, it's a real issue. And Senator Flores has said, along with Representative Guillaume, you can't do this. You've got to have some allowance for this because affordable housing is such a crucial, we're really in crisis about that.
And you mentioned funding, which I think is going to be an essential piece. Is there a dollar sign that you're hoping for, or is it, whatever you can get?
It's whatever we can get, but it would be a hefty, it would be to move the needle and to fill the gaps. We would be looking at around 70 million, what we would want sustainable for the greater Houston area. But it's one of those things where the state wants to exercise more and more control over the homelessness response system, or at least that's the indications we're getting. And we're not objecting to this, but put your money where your mouth is, right? Yeah. If you want to be a player in the game, put some skin in the game, because there's very, very little state funding right now.
Well, Councilmember Ramirez,
Sure.
As a city leader, are there any policy issues that are on your radar?
Oh my gosh, what's not on my radar? As an at-large council member, that's the beauty of the position. I can work on whatever I want to work on, and certainly homelessness is one of the issues that I've worked on. And to tag along with what Jamie says, he certainly knows more about the legislation that's out there. But I've told the mayor and his staff that I'm more than willing to go to Austin and lobby on behalf of some of the bills that would help us address our homelessness issues and other issues. Homelessness is very important. We have a ton of important issues, and we're going to be trying to get financial assistance from the state on a number of fronts, especially our water system, which is in dire straits. But I'm very interested to see what is in Senator Parker's bill, and I'm going to ask Jamie to share latest draft of that at the end of this meeting. I'd like to read that in case I run into him. And thanks to the Greater Houston Partnership for setting up tomorrow. But I want to be a help in that regard before the legislature. And of course, in Houston, earlier this afternoon, we had our public comment session, and a number of folks spoke on the civility ordinance, or the proposal. It hasn't really been brought before council yet to expand the civility ordinance citywide, and so that's definitely a topic that maybe we should focus on at some point. But
could you share a little more
Sure.
about that? Yeah.
Sure, and again, I can't speak for the mayor, right? He's made a number of statements at various times about civility ordinances being enforced citywide. In my mind, I see it as a tool to be used in certain circumstances where maybe nothing else will work. I'm not in favor of a huge sweep, just putting everybody into jail cells. That's not what it's about. But I don't approve of the other extreme, which is, anything goes anywhere at any time. So I view that if it is presented to council and does pass as a tool to be used in certain circumstances to compel care or something like that, that's another reason I'm interested to see Senator Parker's legislation because that might be a tool that we can use as well in certain circumstances.
Well, you mentioned joining us in Austin, and I think having our local elected officials with us is going to be key as we continue to advocate on various issues impacting our city, including water infrastructure and homelessness. But another important tool is the coalitions and the groups that our city has already formed, right? That's how Houston is able to advocate so effectively in Austin. And I wanted to ask you guys, and when it pertains to the city of homelessness, when it pertains to the issue of homelessness, what groups or committees in Houston are focusing on the issue? Where do you see the conversations happening as a citywide elected official?
Well, I think as was mentioned, I'm chair of the Quality of Life Committee, and we recently took up the mayor's new homelessness plan. And I viewed that as a chance to get information out to the public. It was rolled out in November. I thought we could flesh out the details a little bit, and we did, and hopefully, extended that conversation. But the big thing right now that we've tried to get out to the public is the need for funds, right? So it's going to take government funding, philanthropic dollars, and I've encouraged the public, to pitch in as they can as well. So Quality of Life Committee, more informational than anything at this point on homelessness.
Jamie, where do you see these conversations taking place?
So I'm going to start by plugging our advocacy committee for Way Home members or partners. We actually have an advocacy committee, and we're working with them to develop legislative strategies and try to make sure that we have all of our legislative bases covered. And it's a great working group. So if you're part of the Way Home and you're not part of that advocacy group, you really should be. You have to listen to me, but that's a small price to pay to be around like-minded people who are going to share your enthusiasms. We work a lot with Harris County. In fact, I'm part of a working group with the Harris County County Attorney and Juvenile Probation and some other groups working on some minor issues or issues impacting minors who may be experiencing homelessness, and also the city as well. And T-Noise, a group that we work with a lot on policy.
Well, since we're all plugging our advocacy groups, the Greater Houston Partnership has a advisory committee on the public policy division, and it's going to be the Local Issues Committee. It's a new committee that people can join, and I lead it. So if anyone's interested, come find me after. I want to talk a little bit about the environment in Austin, right? We have a new Speaker of the House, there's been some changes to leadership and rules. Jamie, would you mind just walking us through that and how it affects your advocacy?
Sure, yeah, and that dynamic we're going to see that dynamic play out, and I don't think there's a lot of need to rehash the whole Kim Paxton impeachment, all that, but all of these things are in the background, and they're still in the background, and they've not gone away. They're just taken different forms. Obviously, our speaker is Dustin Burrows, and he defeated Cook. And what we've really got here we've kind of got a division within the Republicans. And when you talk about Texas, particularly in the Senate, I'm talking about the House here, but in the Senate, I mean, they're running the show over there. And in the House, of course, very powerful as well. And because we are a red state. But we now have a bit of a divide, right, in that party. We have what I would call the TLR Republicans, or the Texans for Lawsuit Reform Republicans, which is a political action committee. You can call them the Cook Republicans or the Bonin Republicans. But they're the typical Texas. They're very business-minded, right? They're fairly moderate by Texas standards. And their interest is really with the Texas economy. There are other, I'm not trying to pigeonhole them, but that is their guiding sort of lodestar. And that's vastly oversimplifying things. And then, of course, you have more of the newer coalition that is they're more Trump-aligned. There's a lot more billionaire influence there than there is with the traditional TLR Republicans. And we're seeing the rise of that as well. And so when we speak of for example, Dan Parker, who is not super affiliated with either, but Dustin Burrows is, how is that dynamic going to play out? And what it causes us to do is to rethink our strategies, particularly when it comes to committees, particularly when it comes to bill sponsors. How are these internal party dynamics going to play out with respect to our legislation? And the House rules become very interesting as well. I don't know if anybody followed that, but there was sort of a power play done, and sort of a very short vote. And both sides both sides are unhappy about it, and that's a good compromise. The sort of establishment Republicans got their desire that no Democrats can chair any House committees, which is something. And on the other side, Democrats got mandatory vice chairs and expanded vice chair powers. So no one's happy, but the playing field's a lot better than it was for us. And also a lot of new subcommittee powers, and a lot of new subcommittees, ability to create subcommittees, and new powers and new funding for these subcommittees. So all that's going to play out in the House. But the House-Senate dynamic is also going to play into this. When I mentioned Dan Parker's legislation, this is also has the strong support right now of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who's the president of the Senate. So we don't see anything coming out of the House making it through the Senate that is not okayed by this group. And we also don't see anything around homelessness coming out of the Senate that it passes the Senate. That is not being put out by Dan Parker. That is just kind of the way things are lining up. I could be wrong about this. I've been wrong about many, many things, but that's the way that this is kind of shaping up. So the House-Senate dynamic is also going to come into play, where the House continually feels disrespected by the Senate, because they are, and the Senate constantly feels like the House is a bunch of rabble-rousers. This is going to influence what happens as well. And lastly, what's going to be the most influential, extraneous sorts of things this session is going to be the wild and crazy changes at the federal level. Because there's a great deal of uncertainty about what's going to happen with all federal agencies at this point. There's a great deal of uncertainty what's going to happen with funding across the board at this point. Texas may decide, we're going to take a wait and see attitude and see what shakes down from the federal government before we do anything too ambitious, which is not great when we have a state that only has session every 2 years. So a big part of our job this session, a big part of my job, is going to be prioritizing things and saying, no, we need to move on these issues now. There are people who are both experiencing a lower quality of life because of homelessness in their areas, and there are people experiencing homelessness who are at great risk. And we need to be taking care of all these groups of practical solutions. So our job is really to cut through all of this noise and get done the things that we know that we can get done this session. Sorry, that was really long.
That was great. Councilmember Ramirez, as an elected official, you're in a nonpartisan seat. What advice would you give to the people in this room who are engaging with their elected officials and trying to advocate in this new environment?
Well, first of all, I'd say thank you for being here. You're here because you care passionately about homelessness, and many of you work to address it, and so thank you for that. I would say, have consistent contact on the issue. Elected officials don't know what the sense of the public is unless they hear from their constituents. And as an elected official, I really do want to know what my constituents think. And if I'm not out in the field in meetings and so forth and reading emails that we get, then I'm not an effective elected official. And I know when you call a legislator, they're going to log in that call, and they're going to keep track of who is called about what and what positions folks are advocating for. So I would say reach out in some form and be consistent. Keep the squeaky wheel gets the grease. It certainly does in my office, and I'm sure it's no different if you're a legislator.
Absolutely, and you hit the nail. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, absolutely. I think too often people assume that in order to advocate, you have to be a politician or you have to have big money. But man, when I was working at the city, it was really the constituents and those that called consistently, the neighborhoods that reached out, that moved the needle. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that and the power of grassroots advocacy. Do you have a particular example in which grassroots advocacy made a big difference in your job, or?
Well, I won't say that it changed my position on anything, but the group that I've been most impressed with, and it's not on the issue of homelessness, but an advocacy group in Northeast Houston, it's NAC, the Northeast Action Collective, I think it is. The yellow t-shirt folks, they are organized, they are informed, and they are consistent, and you can't help but notice them. And I thought they were very effective last year, during the time when we were considering the budget, and they were pushing for more dollars for drainage in Northeast Houston. So be organized, be informed, and be consistent. And they were very effective.
And Jamie, what about you?
Yeah, I think grassroots can be incredibly effective, and I agree with the councilman. There is no, and with Hannah, there is no a more effective way to advocate for anyone, actually, than reaching out to the elected official who represents you. They are going to take you so seriously because you're a constituent. They actually keep a record of it, and they're going to keep a record. They're going to be able to, when they look up that bill, they're going to know how many constituent calls they got. And one of the reasons they can do that, so few people do this. If you call your elected officials, your senator, your representative, and say, hey, I want you to vote yes on this bill because I really feel strongly about this, and you tell them you're a constituent, you're going to actually move the needle. They take that so seriously. But from grassroots can be incredibly impactful. I remember this has been a number of years ago. I was a different group. We were looking to expand free and reduced lunches for students. And the way we were able to do it was we started doing grassroots advocacy in agricultural regions of Texas. And what were we doing? We were reaching out not only to folks and saying, hey, this is the reality. We have this many kids going to school. They're not getting lunch. They're not getting food at home. They're hungry. This is the effect that it has on learning. And this is the effect it has on classroom disruption. So we mobilized that way. We also mobilized people who worked in these industries because, look, the food is going to come from, you guys are producing it. This is actually going to be a benefit for you. So it's kind of grassroots / very targeted advocacy. But the upshot of it was 1 million more kids a year get free or reduced lunch. Hungry kids are getting fed because of grassroots advocacy, because of people just like you in this room who took the time to call and made the impossible possible. Because Texas is not the kind of state that's like, oh yeah, let's give poor kids a lot of stuff. But they did this time. Why? Because it benefited agriculture and because of grassroots advocacy. There's a little sheet on the chair that talks about some advocacy methods, and I'm happy to talk to anyone after this. I'll talk through any of those or discuss them more at length.
That's great. Well, this has been a really great conversation. I think in our closing, and then we'll open it up to Q&A, what advice do you have for the people in this room who are looking to get involved on the issue of homelessness or any other issue that they're passionate about? We talked about, calling. Anything else?
I would recommend getting to know if you don't know this, well, first, find out who represents you. And there's no shame if you don't know. Most people don't know who the heck their state rep is, right? Because we have such little interaction with them. Despite the incredible influence they have over our lives, most Texans, I would venture probably 90%, don't actually know who their state rep is. So if you don't know, find out. Go to Texas legislature online and familiar yourself a little bit with these state systems and learn how to look up bills. But at the very least, learn who represents you. You can follow us on social media for legislative updates to know which bills are going to support our homeless response system and which bills are going to be a negative on our homeless response system. And reach out to your legislators and contact them. But even more than that, if you want to go a little bit deeper, I want to take that next step. I've got a taste for it now. Follow that bill, learn which committee it's going to. Why? Because I promise I'm not going to turn this into a lecture on, but why? Because you can think of the legislature as a series of tar pits and your bills as dinosaurs. And your bill's going to wander off into a tar pit and drown if you don't guide it away from that tar pit. This analogy just came to me, forgive me for this. But the first of those tar pits, the biggest and the stickiest, is the committee. The only things that have to happen under the Texas Constitution is if a bill gets filed, it has to be sent to committee, and that's it. It doesn't have to get a hearing. And the easiest way to kill a bill, never give it a hearing. The second easiest way to kill a bill, give it a hearing because we know this legislator and we got to give them a little something, and then never vote it out of committee. And that's it. Those reaching out to committee, knowing who the committee members are, and reaching out to them before the bill gets heard and after the bill gets heard to ask them to vote it out of committee is another not huge step. It's not huge as far as time or commitment, but it is a leverage point that is probably one of the most sensitive leverage points in the entire legislative process in Texas. So I would ask everyone, learn a little bit more about the committees and learn a little bit more who the members are, and don't be afraid to reach out to them.
That's great advice. Councilmember Ramirez?
So in addition to be organized, be informed, and be consistent, I would say try to enlist others to your cause, right? There's strength in numbers. A lot of people see that our homelessness issue is growing. Our numbers are growing. People may complain about it. Perfect time to say, hey, why don't we do something about it? Here are my thoughts on it, and this is what's going on, and we have the chance now that the legislature is in session to maybe get some action and maybe give local authorities more tools to address it and additional funding. So I would say try to win others to your cause.
That's great advice too. Okay, well, it looks like we have some time for Q&A. Does anyone have a question?
Any questions? I'll go around with the mic and just pass it on to y'all. Oh, sure.
I know, I have so many questions. So I would love to hear from you, Jamie. In your opinion, you've been at the coalition for how long? Is it
July.
July. What does Houston do right when it comes to addressing homelessness?
I think that we do so many things right, but I think it's our reliance on data and not on some esoteric philosophy that guides us. We are very, and we have fantastic people. I'll give you an example of one of the things we do right, because it also allows me to complain more about Senate Bill 241. We set the national model for homeless encampment closures, decommissionings, excuse me. And because we developed a model that involves a series of steps that brings in a number of players from the health services and mental health services to go in and identify people with conditions, to our outreach teams who were going to those encampments and saying the encampment's going to get closed down. Let's go ahead and let's go ahead and get you started on a journey towards a housing solution. To the police who are going to come in and be like, hey, we're going to come break this up. You need to go. You need to listen to these people and find a housing solution. And then finally, solid waste who comes in and cleans it all up. This is something that's very well orchestrated, very well planned, and it works. The encampment doesn't come back. Why? Because we had a housing solution for everyone in that encampment. That is one thing that the rest of the state and our legislature can learn, that if you start imposing 90-day deadlines on encampments, all of a sudden what you're going to have is whack-a-mole. You're going to have police coming in and busting them up and then reforming right down the street because they're not at the encampment because they don't like their home, right? They're at the encampment because that is their home. And so I would say those are things we do really well.
And I know, with the mayor's new homelessness plan, you guys are seeking creative funding sources. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that in terms of, you're going to the state, advocating for additional dollars, but where else are you guys looking?
So we're looking at philanthropy and we're looking at local government, and we really do want the state to be engaged on this and provide sustainable funding, either through a tax on something like vapes. Just throwing that out there, hoping some just going to will it into reality. Because we're talking about creative funding. We're really good at creative funding, right? I think everyone in this area or an adjacent issue area has become really, really good with creative funding. And what we really need is sustainable funding. And that really should come from our state. Again, we have the dollars and we have the surplus. We've got to find enough common ground. I'm going to steal one of Kelly's words. We're not asking them to support, do-gooders in their endless quest to make life perfect for everyone. What we're asking for is the most vulnerable of our citizens. There's got to be some common ground we can find where the state can infuse some money, and we can provide real solutions for people who are having real problems.
All right. Well, I'll stop hogging the mic. Does anyone else have a question?
This is really more than an ask, and I wrote it down to be efficient because Jamie knows I can be inefficient very often. Is while a lot of the legislation I know is well-intentioned, but beyond exposing contrasting values, oftentimes it's not very pragmatic in its thinking. It certainly exposes the contrast between good policies and actual practices. So my two asks of the three of you, and thank you for being willing to do this. Jamie and I've sat in the room together many times before, is make sure that you highlight unfunded mandates. It is stunning what we're asked to do that we have no money to do, and it's difficult, and who and how is it being paid for? And then the other one is to ask them to please be mindful of unintended consequences. It is stunning in the other work we do in advocacy how, again, well-intentioned legislation, as y'all know, can have very unintended consequences. So my fear is that should that not happen, that the fiscal impact on our city could be tremendous, but more importantly, the human impact in our city could be devastating. So it's more of an ask. I've been where you've been, just ask them to remember. And Jamie, we've done that together before. So, but thank you all for doing that.
Those are great points, Lance, and those are two of the big pitfalls in policy, right? Unfunded mandates, which Texas loves, and unintended consequences. And So I'm so grateful to be part of the coalition where we have such tremendous data and such dedicated professionals who really know the system to help avoid those unintended consequences, and also people with lived experience can also, when brought in to policy discussions, can also reveal ways that the law you thought was good, it actually, it's going to have some consequences that we're not going to be real happy with.
No, I'll just second that. But Lance, I don't know if the legislature understands those terms. Really, I mean, I was looking at some immigration legislation earlier today that would rope in local authorities, in immigration enforcement, and there's no fiscal note on that bill. People can put that idea forward. Where are the resources? Even if we were of a mind to do that, and I'm not saying we are, but again, unfunded mandates that they seem to excel at that, unfortunately.
I'm Ed Gonzalez, the Harris County Sheriff. I just came today because I want to keep learning, and I want to thank each and every one of you for being here and the work that you do, not only on this but on other issues. My point is just to encourage us as a community to continue to work together. We're simply not going to incarcerate our way out of this issue. We've been seeing our numbers of unhoused individuals being incarcerated increasing. And so we have to be mindful not to make incarceration like a key part of the strategy. About 9% of our population in jail is described as being unhoused. So we are paying it in some way. And I think that we obviously have to be mindful of the legislature at the state level, the federal level, but even here locally, sometimes it's just developing maybe a more effective continuum of care and being more wise and effective with the systems that are in place right now to make sure that they're operating as efficient as possible and that all systems are working together. Because somehow we all work within a bureaucracy, if you will, and there's so many different players, the mental health system, public health, law enforcement, 90 plus agencies around this region, and so we all have an important role to play. So I just want to thank you all, and maybe if you could speak to how we could better coordinate responses so that it's a cohesive system, that regardless of the dollars that may come in and out, that the systems are working effectively, so we're not only trying to incarcerate our way out of this problem, because we'll never solve it that way.
Can I speak to that? And by the way, Sheriff Gonzalez was on Houston City Council many years ago, so thank you for that service and your current service. But you're part of the criminal justice system. That was my career. And I remember as a prosecutor in the early 90s, the way we dealt with homelessness back then was we arrested him for trespass and we threw him in jail. And, I would look sometimes at the rap sheets and you would see conviction after conviction after conviction for criminal trespass. Thank goodness we've progressed since then, but it does continue to be a challenge. And I think to your point, maybe the way we work together better is we get in the room together and we talk about it and we put our heads together and we see what we can come up with. So I think that works well. Earlier, a few months ago, I met with the Herman Park Conservancy. They're at wit's end because, a lot of the patients, mentally ill patients, get released from Ben Taub. They can't keep them any longer. They take up residence in Herman Park, and they were at wit's end. And there were many incidents where their individual safety was threatened. And so we got a group together. We got Kelly out and Chief Satterwhite, and right, and we did some assessments after that, and hopefully we'll help that situation. But it would help to have an additional tool from the legislature to be able to deal with folks in that condition. So.
Hello, my name is Dan Watkins. I'm with Court Furniture. I want to thank y'all for being up there. I know I couldn't do it, so very proud of you, especially you. I ain't messing with you. But I do have a question. It's kind of two parts, so work with me a little bit. I know with court and before I started in this journey of homelessness and all this, it's, for all the profit we try to make as a company, this is probably the most rewarding deal, and my company's 100% behind it. So they stand, they put their money where their mouth is with it. Looking at the homelessness problem, as I get my question is, are there a metric on the economic impact that Houston's had with that success? And if so, would that be leveraged as incentive for the state to invest in that? Because I know it's a soft cost.
Probably have never measured from that perspective, but we could build it into the data group in this next year.
Compare it to,
Yeah. So no, but yes.
I feel like a politician. Thank you, Kelly.
Vote for Kelly.
But I'm just listening to this, and I'm kind of, I'm originally from Chicago. I've been in Houston almost 30 years, so blue to red, purple, independent, right? But I know in business, Houston is very business-minded, and I know that when I deal with customers, we talk about an economic impact. And some of that's immeasurable, so you kind of have to paint the picture. Because I did live downtown before I was married with kids, and I remember under the Pierce Elevated by the bus station, it was just not a good representation. But now when I look at where the Ion is, where the Sears used to be, in that area, it's like totally gentrified. And so I know that most companies are leaving like California and places where they have no control over that. And I just, from my perspective, listen to you guys. I know you got to get the money, and then the bleeding hearts, and sometimes you got to push them together. I think that would be a good, I don't know.
Would love that number.
yeah, comparing it to incarceration, cost of incarceration.
Over and out.
And to that point, Mike Nichols, former homeless czar and now head of our city housing department, talks about how much cheaper it is to house a person experiencing homelessness than it is to put him in a jail cell and pay for him there. So he's got some figures, but I don't know about locally.
So I had a question, just, in conversation, we'll take the city hat off for a second. So with the executive orders that came out a couple weeks ago, and, we saw, at least I did on my side, saw a lot of nonprofits freak out when they couldn't draw down funds from the federal government. And since then they have been able to. When you talk about advocacy, from the legislator side, what about from the other side? Because, I've heard, it was recently as, this week that one of our nonprofits let go of 120 people last week. So as we see these nonprofits who are, in dire situation, and we see that the DEI is being removed, and so when we talk about people with lived experience, when you think about advocacy, how do you continue to advocate for those that are most disenfranchised, but then there is this fear that if we talk about that, our funding will be pulled. So thoughts?
Not sure where to go with that one, in all honesty, Melody. But can I just mention, Mike Nichols sings Melody's praises to the high heavens for finding millions and millions of dollars available for this homeless plan. So thank you for that. But I'm not, not sure I have an answer for that one. Jamie, any thoughts?
I can take a stab. These are uncertain times. Don't panic, right? I think that's the number one thing. This is a time for organizations to focus on their core mission, to keep your head down, to work, stay focused on your core mission, protect what is yours, and get through it, because it will end, right? But I think before it ends, we're going to see as much major change as can happen, and I think a lot of that major change is going to be a shift from the federal government to the states as far as they can push that. And so it's never been more important. Federal advocacy has never been more important at this exact moment, and state advocacy will probably never be more important in about a year or two, if things do shake out in that direction. But there's processes to keep this from spiraling out of control too quickly. And our judiciary is doing a good job of making sure that these changes aren't rammed through on a moment's notice. Will they eventually get around to make some of these changes stick? Yeah, they probably will. We just need to be prepared for that. And again, I think that focusing on core mission is, and identifying what is most important to your core mission is the best steps that we can take right now.
So, anything else from anybody else? Because I want to make sure anybody had anything they wanted to say, that they had the chance to say it. Okay, first and foremost, we absolutely must thank our lovely guests. What I hope you get out of it is that the more you learn about how something works, the more you can work it. That sounds kind of cold and callous, but it's kind of important. The more you understand the rules of how the game is played, the better you are at winning the game. And we are at a time in our lives where really some of these winnings need to happen. And so the more you understand how this works and the best you can find your voice to be at the table, please do. The other thing is, do not make the assumption that somebody will not hear it from your perspective. They may not know your perspective. And so that you get a chance. And it's one of the things why Councilmember Ramirez, I asked for him to come because he's in it for the right reason. And every time I've talked to him, now he was a prosecutor, and I don't know if you know this or not, but you interrogate just a little. Just a tiny bit. And I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't realize it till I actually sat down talking about it. I was sweating. I was like, oh my God, how are we going to get through this? And then I realized he's just curious. He's just interested in understanding. So don't make the assumption either that somebody is not interested in what you have to say if you weren't even willing to take the opportunity or chance to do that. Hannah, yeah, I remember, I'm really glad that they experienced it. But what I want you to see again is this just internal interest of making the world a better place. It may not play out the way you think you're going to advocate, but you get involved in the ways that make the most sense. These are people who are taking their time and their energy to build out policy and ideas and argue and testify and run for office. I'm not doing any of those things. So there's a certain amount of appreciation and love that I can have for anybody who engages in those things. So I just thank you all so much for being here. Coalition for the Homeless really decided this year that our presentations and the work we did was going to be very nerdy and kind of that, but also addressing some things from a realistic, real kind of truth place. That's what we want to do because that's how we'll make things change in the ways that we think are most important. So I want to thank all of you for getting out in the rain, coming all the way over here, sitting through the questions. I hope you got something out of it. I hope it was meaningful to you. I hope you'll noodle on it and come back with something else. But at the end of the day, our goal in life is to be better to our brothers and sisters in all ways possible. And so with that, I just tell you again, much love and appreciation, and thank you very much for being here tonight.